Um, all right, so I kind of already did introductions for you who don't know me. For the few people that may be watching, my name is Paul. My wife Heather and I, we've been going to Buck Run for wow, way longer than it seems like when I try to think back about that. We're going on 10 years. So right before our first was born, we'd been coming maybe a year or two. Crash landed here in Frankfort for work. I told you we've got three now at 10, 7, and 4, and it still feels weird to say. I don't know about you all, but like when you start counting off the ages of your kids, you're like, whoa. Um, and we kind of had this shock realization the other day when I told Heather, I'm like, okay, um, our oldest is 10. He gets his driver's license in 6 years. Like there's a diminishing point here, which we get less and less time of him. And she was like, "Done. Do not say another word. Don't go down that. Like we're done. We're done with that line." Um, but I appreciate you all coming for a little bit this morning. And I'll tell you that I'm not a huge reader. I don't read a ton of like parenting books. That's not really my thing. And I know when we had our first kid, like I was just pretty relaxed about it. Like, yeah, we're having a baby. This is awesome. Like, we'll figure it out. Like, we'll go on. And Adam Bishop was a worship leader pastor here at the time, and he taught a class on parenting littles, much like this one. And it was really influential for me. Like it made me think, like, okay, I need to think about this a little more. I need to actually strategize about a few things. Morning, come on in. We're small but mighty this morning. Oh, awesome, awesome. So there was that moment for us in realizing like okay, like there's a little bit of strategy to this. I might need to think more about this. And I so appreciated that class. And even today, as you know, got older kids, as I've gone back and looked at some of the things that Adam taught in that class and that we discussed, it's just been an encouragement to me and a realization of the fact that we need to be so intentional with our parenting and thinking about it and thinking about what we're fostering in our kids over time. And I joke often that, and it's not a joke, it's the unfortunate reality that our major sin in America might wind up being apathy, that we just have so many toys and distractions that we bumble through life and miss what's important, miss those moments. And especially with our kids, like time flies when you're busy and you've got a million things going on, and missing those opportunities to be intentional parents, just kind of swaying with the breeze of what we're thinking or feeling at the time, or whatever article or book that we read, or just being busy with basketball and sports and camps and whatever we have, and not taking the time to really enjoy it, cherish it, and think about long term outcomes of where we want to be with them as they grow up. So, over the next 6 weeks, here's kind of our layout. So, we're going to start off just today and talk about like parenting objectives, like where we want to go with our kids, what's the long term outcome we want to have, and then assessing ourselves, like where are we as individuals on where we need to be as a parent. Are we taking the time to say, okay, if those are our parenting objectives, are we meeting them? Are we as ourselves reflecting what we need to in Christ to meet those objectives? Next week, we'll talk about living under authority, developing a biblical foundation with our kids. Like, where do we need to start off to make sure that we are pointing them to Christ and spiritual disciplines in the home, and just basic principles of authority. Week 3, we'll hit on developing the heart, and just talking about, all right, as we segue into discipline and correction with our kids, like our focus is not correcting behavior, but really directing the heart and addressing the heart issues with them. And then we'll talk about discipline in week 4. So everything that goes with like, okay, how do we discipline our kids? What's the biblical authority that we have as parents to discipline our kids? And um, how does that play out? Like, how do we do that in a biblical way? What are some pitfalls for ways that we might institute discipline with well-meaning thoughts and ideas, but really wind up correcting behaviors and not heart matters. Week 5 will be kind of how it all plays out. Like when you jump in the discipline, a lot of week 5 will probably be practical discussions, some things that have worked in our house, some things that have not worked in our house. Much more non-convictional things of just like let's talk through that. And week 6 will kind of be a catch-all, and I think we may have like a Q&A with some parents who are now have kids out of grade school and into college or even into adulthood. So, I don't know for you all, and a lot of us have older kids in here, so we'll change direction a little bit for the older kids. But I think a lot about like if you've seen the memes of like expectation versus reality. Like, here's the perfect picture of what you thought you were getting, and here's what you actually got. I had a few to share, but then I thought that's probably not a good direction for us to go in the Sunday morning class. But, so often I think in parenting, our life is viewed by what we think parenting will be like versus what it actually is, and how that's shaped by like other people that we see, right? Like other people that we see parenting or what we saw before we had kids. And I think back to the baby days for us, and I just remember it being like stage 1 is like all survival, right? Like, okay, like you got to keep the baby alive and you got to keep yourself alive. Like these are the 2 objectives. And then at some point you realize, okay, maybe I've got to do a little more than this. Like you see the sin nature play out in your kid and you realize, okay, like I see how that's playing out in them, and I see my need to institute correction and the fact that sin was already in them and they from 6 months old knew what they wanted or earlier than that and would find a way to get it. So I'm just curious for you all, like what do you feel like has been your greatest like parenting surprise? Like the thing that you thought, like I didn't see that coming. Like I didn't think parenting would be this or that, but that in particular is like, okay, I didn't expect to have to deal with this, or I didn't. What was your biggest parenting surprise? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I definitely, yeah. Especially with 3, I had and I tried to foster a realization of that in our kids one day, um, and maybe not exactly a great example to use, but like I remember I took all 3 of ours in the living room and I was like, I want you to all come in here for a second. I was like, okay, I want you to go to the closet and get your shoes and bring them over here and put them on. So all 3 went and did it. I said, okay, now take them off and go put them in the closet. They went and put them in the closet. I said, now come back over here. I want you to go to the closet and get your shoes on and put them on, and I want you to come back over here. So they did that. I said, now take them off. And I said it 6 times. And I said, now, listen, the reason I told you that and the reason I made you do that is, how did it make you feel? Like, we were annoyed. It was ridiculous. Why did you make us do that 6 times? I was like, there are 3 of you. If you ask me a question and each of you answers it, each of you asks the same question again, I have answered it 3 times. If each of you does that twice, I've now answered that question 6 times, just like you just did with your shoes. And yeah, there's that moment as a parent, you're like, okay, like, and especially, you all have 4, with 5, sorry, 5. So yeah, a lot of us are kid heavy in this class today. Like that realization of like, okay, my time is finite. That's a good one. What else? What else came as like the reality versus expectation for you all? Anything else come up? I think for me, even if you just talk like general trends of parenting, I don't know what I had in my mind when we first had little kids. I guess I envisioned like these times like I'm going to take them hunting and fishing. I'm going to instill these things in them, and then you kind of look and you realize that okay, there's a whole lot before you get to that relationship. Like when you get to when I was thinking about these teenage and college years, imparting my vast wisdom onto my kids. Like, that Like you're going to get there, but so much happens in these little years that set you up for where that relationship will be when your kids are in that older time frame. And I kind of remember thinking back to families and friends that we had that they had older kids, and a lot of times you would see much of that relationship established by the time that the kid's 14, 15, or 16 years old. The trajectory of where that is, that foundation was laid very early on as to how that relationship would be, how much influence a parent would have in their life at that stage, or if that kid would view themselves as completely independent and a parent is just, good advice or like an authority in their life still is determined upon, okay, what's the foundation that you lay before that. Let's turn and open up scripture for a second. Somebody mind pulling up Psalm 127:5? Morning. Yeah, that's a great point. Like, kind of twofold. Like, one, parenting is not prescriptive. Like, you can't just like, this is what works for every kid. And two, like, um, we can't shape our kids deterministically. Like, we can't just lay it out and like, this is what they're going to be for the rest of their life. Like, they have their own heart, they have their own will, and that that determines whether they accept the molding or reject it or which direction that they take. But yeah, that's a great point. Like your head early on in your parenting that like, okay, if I do X, Y, and Z, or if I shelter them from X, Y, and Z, that is, I've eliminated that as a concern. But like, yeah, they're all different and they all choose their own way. That's a great point. Psalm 127:5. Does somebody mind reading that for us? I actually started 5. I meant to go back to 3. So, do you mind starting at 3? I love that. I love that psalm for a lot of reasons, but a reminder for us, already talking about how the craziness of parenting, the constantness, the busyness of it all, the reminder of our children being that heritage from the Lord, the fruit, a reward, and the blessed nature that we have to be able to have them in our lives, to enjoy them, and the opportunity to mold them. And I got to say, like, also, I'm sorry, I will try not to give too many like hunting and fishing analogies, but it's just going to happen, all right? And I limit it. And that's right, that's right. And for me, a lot of what I do, I'm not great at structure, and that's okay. But I try to make up for it in a lot of ways in when we go out and do things with the kids, that it's a constant communication and talking with them, and learning life lessons. And for me, a lot of that happens hunting and fishing. And I think there's a lot of value in that, especially on the hunting side, because there's just a lot of hard lessons learned. And I won't go into details, but whenever I hear this psalm, I can't help but thinking about the archery comparison. And there's just so much to it. So forgive me for this analogy from the get-go, but if you've not like ever shot a bow, and specifically when you do it in like an outdoor a hunting context, shooting a bow, it's very interesting because when you take a bow, and you've seen people do it, you're going to put a hand over here, and then you're going to have a draw weight on the bow, which draw weight means how hard you have to pull back to fire it, all right? And the point really is, on most of the time when you're shooting a bow, is you want the maximum difficulty of that pull because that will help you shoot farther, more accurate, etc. So when you go to shoot a bow, and you think about this biblical example of children being like arrows from a warrior, when you go aim at something, like I can take my fingers and just make a little L, and I can easily aim at whatever I want to. It's not hard. It's not a lot of effort. It's really easy to focus on when I'm not under stress, when I'm not under pressure. That's cake, right? When you shoot a bow and you pull that back and you pull back a draw weight and you pull it back here, you are pulling back with every ounce of strength that you have. If you're hunting, you're doing it while being quiet, and you're aiming at a target. And you have to aim while under maximum stress and pressure of making a wise decision, pulling back as hard as you can. And when you do that, and when you aim and you pull back, 1 inch of adjustment on this hand of where the front and back of that arrow is 10 or 20 yards off on your target. So pulling back, aiming, and every time I go hunting, there's the release point. When you aim at something and you let the arrow go, every time still, I get a little sick to my stomach. Because the moment I let the arrow go, that's it. Nothing I do from that point on affects what happens down the line. And Parker and I had tough conversations this year because that decision has big consequences when you're hunting. Big consequences, a lot of possible outcomes, a lot of really awful outcomes, a lot of really good ones. But the point is that there's those 3 stages of drawing, aiming, and release that happen. And it's so much like parenting. Now, the analogy isn't perfect, don't get me wrong. It's an analogy, it is what it is. But as a parent, we're doing the same thing. We are pulling back, we're under a lot of stress, we're under a lot of pressure. But every little moment and every little movement does count in that final trajectory, right? Like we've got to aim at an objective under the stress and the pressure. We have to select a target. We have to make wise decisions because, and especially, we're going to gear a wide swath with who's in the class on ages of kids, but especially when you've got young kids, when you've got really young ones, a lot of that development's happening in the 1 to 5 year old range. I'm not a child development specialist, but 1 to 3 years old, maximum brain development. 1 to 5, social connections, learning. More of it happens in that range than anywhere else. And again, go back to, we don't shape deterministically. We don't let that arrow go and it hits the target. But the point is this, that when you set that release at some point, for us as parents, there's a realization that sinks in that our influence over our kids is ever diminishing. Now think about that for a minute. Like, our influence over them is always diminishing. When you start out with an infant, you control everything, right? Like, everything that they do is on your schedule. Of course, you're adjusting some to their needs, but when they eat, if they eat, that's up to you. When they sleep, what they do, you're shaping every bit of that moment. But at some point in their life, they will be the determiner of how much influence you have on them. And we pray and we hope that as parents, we get to parent into our kids well into their adulthood, and we strive for it. But there's also the knowledge that, there's a point at which they may decide, like, no, I don't want your influence anymore. So thinking about the point for us in the extended analogy is that in this moment of max pressure of having kids, of constantness in the home, to take aim at an objective, to focus in on it under that pressure, and to make wise choices and make the most of those little moments. And with the realization of where our influence is and the fact that it diminishes over time, but also an acknowledgement of we play a role in when that influence diminishes and how. And we're going to talk in subsequent weeks about just some things to think about in terms of little ways that you deal every day with your kids and who you set up to make the authority and the decision making in their life. Little ways like, what questions are you asking? Are you setting them up at 2 years old that they determine what they have for breakfast and where they go with their schedule? They can seem like really kind things, but also to make sure that they understand who the authority is in that teaching. Because if they don't, they may reach 12, 13, 14 years old, and at that point, they view you as just a mild advice giver, not an authority. And they view themselves as the decision maker. And at that point, your influence diminished much quicker. So how you set that up now makes so much of a difference. And the final point there that I kind of missed is that course correction becomes more challenging the further you are from those early stages. Like if you have super young kids in the home, you have maximum influence at that point. You have more of an opportunity of course correction. So constantly assess and look for ways to change and improve. And that course correction becomes more difficult as time comes on. By no means impossible, still there, but it does become requires more strategy and more thinking. So the two pieces we're hitting on today, the objectives, like what's our purpose in our parenting, what's our goal, and then assessment, like how do we assess where we're going, how do we assess how we're doing, and I want our focus really in that assessment to be on ourselves personally. So the objective, let's turn back to Scripture and start there. Deuteronomy 6:4-7. Would somebody mind pulling that one up and reading for us, please? Yeah, I mean, it starts with where our focus is pointed, right? Like our focus and attention. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Starts with us, where our attention is, where our focus is, and then what else? Yes, yeah, you're right. Like there's two pieces to it, right? Like there's the unrelenting nature of life and our desire for structure, but then also like, hey, everything's an opportunity. Like every lesson learned is an opportunity to teach. And yeah, I mean, I love the breakdown in there. You shall teach them diligently to your children. Shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. And the takeaway there is discipleship for us, it's not like a one-time thing, right? It's a way of life in our homes. Like we should set ourselves up for that to be a way of life. And I'll share with you pretty bluntly where my failings are. And for me, I'm not a huge structure person, and I move really, really fast. It's just 1,000 things, and my neighbor laughs at me. He's retired, and he uses his binoculars to watch what I do at the house. And he calls me the Energizer Bunny because he'll see me like I'll start on one project and I'll go really fast, and then I'll go immediately to the next one, and I'll finish it 75%, and then I'll go to the next one, and and he enjoys it. It gives him something to observe. But, there's moments for us as parents of recognition that, yes, the craziness is always unrelenting. It's happening. And as you said, like, recognizing, okay, this is also an opportunity. How do I slow that down to have the conversations with our children that we need to have? And even as we have more than one, the challenge becomes even more so of one-on-one, taking time to communicate with them and to disciple each of them. So then that gets to like, okay, to what end? Like what are our goals? What are our objectives? To be disciples of Christ, like grow up to see our kids disciples of Christ, able to, be on their own, out in the world, and live a life and know what it means to be an adult and to follow Christ while you're doing that, right? Anything else? It's very, very different. I mean, that's right. To be able to make decisions about, all right, if you're a disciple of Christ, what are the authorities in the world? Which ones do you listen to? Which ones do you not? That's a great point. Yeah, but I mean, those are good questions to have, to realize that, like, okay, we live in a broken world. Things don't always go according to what we have planned or the way we'd like to see it. but twofold. Like, yeah, that's one. Here is the standard. Here is the way that God expects life to be lived. But also, like, here are ways that we fall short of that. Here's some of the repercussions of that. And here's how we live in light of sin being in the world, and knowing it, and knowing when and what to say in those situations, and knowing that, hey, we are all sinners. We are all going to make mistakes. And the forgiveness and repentance that comes from that and what we do then matters as well. Like and sorry, I'm diving in later. That's a good point. You pulled me into later stuff. But right, like we've got these big, and Jennifer, I love what you hit there. Like we've got these big abstract goals and trajectories for our kids of like, okay, when you're full adult, I want to see you fully functioning. I want to see you being a disciple of Christ with wisdom and discernment and knowing how to live in the world. And sometimes it's hard to like break that down into bite-sized chunks. Like, okay, that's where we want to go, but you brought up a great point. So let's think about the big picture where we want to be long term, but let's also think about what do we want things to look like in 2 years or in 5 years? Like, okay, my kids are in my home. I've got this time that I have maximum influence. How do we at 6, like Jennifer said, start talking in and adding things in, having discussions about challenging things in life that set them up for the next stage? At work, we have a concept we call objectives and key results, where like we're for my team, we have, okay, here's the objective for the year that I want us, here's the target I want us to hit, and like, here's the key results that I want us to meet those targets. So as parents, for us thinking about, okay, if our objective is a disciple of Christ, like what are the key result things that we need to make sure happen in the next 2 to 6 years? And you're starting simple. Like one, if I want my child to be a disciple of Christ, I need to be praying for them early and often, because that's not a decision I get to make. So I need to be praying for them early and often and hard for the Lord to work in their hearts, for their hearts to be turned towards Him, because I don't shape them 100%. That's not my call. Secondly, all right, if that's my goal, then what is church for me? How do I shape them what church is in their life? Is church the priority on Sunday morning in our household? Or is it like, all right, church is the priority for everything except for basketball. If there's a basketball game, basketball always wins. But anything else like church, like what are those ways that we're shaping them and teaching them about the church? What is it we're teaching them about Bible study time? Like, okay, is Bible study time just one thing that we do as a family? Are we making some goals to shape them in terms of, okay, I want you to learn to read the Bible on your own. So a goal by 7 or 8 is that you're sitting and you have a quiet time where all you can do is you can just sit there quietly, or you can read your Bible. Like, what are the key results that you want in your household to set towards that broader goal? And I also think it's wise and helpful in the busyness. One of the things that we've done with a lot of our kids is set some responsibility goals for them, and teach them through the responsibilities. So for us, an example of that would be, all right, we want you to be able to get ready for bed and do that all on your own independently. So, we kind of took steps towards that. We're like, all right, well, you need to be able to shower by yourself. You need to be able to brush your teeth. So even as early as, 5 to 6 years old, like we were stepping through that with them of like, okay. And so now we have the option that they're getting older, that it's like, okay, it's 30 minutes before bedtime. You all do your routine. Oldest starts his shower, helps out the younger ones, and everybody gets to bed. That happens every single night without any hiccups. I don't know. Yeah, you all know that's a lie, right? It doesn't work. Let's talk about that a little bit. But yeah, it doesn't work out perfectly, obviously, every night. But it was a goal for us to work towards that, to get them to a place where that was a routine that was in their ability to accomplish. And so often, our kids can probably accomplish much more than we realize at an earlier age. But I think, again, setting some objectives and breaking them down into smaller bits of where you want them to be, and doing that on the spiritual side, on the practical life side as well. And again, for us in our house, that was a high priority. We'll talk about that some more kind of in week 5 if that's an interest of stuff that you all have tried or that we have. Um, and it was funny, even leading up to this class, we talk about like objectives and where we want to be in our parenting and these moments of busyness and when we want answers and we want to solve problems that are frustrating us. Um, I'll confess, this is funny, but on the lead up to this class, just out of curiosity, I started reading a lot of Facebook articles. And Facebook's hysterical because like you feed the beast algorithm, right? Like once you read like a parenting article, then like more come up. And man, it was wild. I read a whole lot of them, and I kind of got sucked into it because I mean, some of them are crazy. Like some of them are just like you read it and you're like, that's the worst advice I have ever heard. And then some of them you're like, whoa, that's pretty persuasive. You think about, no, that sounds pretty good. And it's a challenge for even us as adults to think, okay, that's a person that's got it together with their kids. Like they're pulling it out. One of the things that I read about a lot as I kind of was just out there browsing was this gentle parenting concept of like, hey, you read about this and authority. Basically, like they made it sound very persuasive and very, very good. And look, if gentle parenting is something you know, I'm going to just say that's a broad term. Like there's a whole lot in that. There's not, anyway. Um, Trust the meaning in this one, but there's these concepts out there that like, okay, authority is a bad thing. Like, don't be authoritative. Authority is a bad thing in your kid's life. Anything your kid goes through, like, talk through them gently, like, probe the why questions. Like, there are very persuasive parenting techniques out there that sound good, but if you get down to the heart of them, you realize, one, the premise is not scriptural, neither is the ultimate goal. And it's a caution for us, right? Which in that, and wrap up, our last piece this morning is talking about the importance of assessing ourselves and where we are. And as the start, right? When we started in Deuteronomy, right? Like you pointed out, like the focus is on the Lord and our goal in our life being about our following Christ and doing it and pointing all glory to him and pointing our authority in our kids' lives back to our authority granted by the Lord. And a realization for us, like to disciple our children, we must first be transformed by the gospel. It's by God's grace that we are able to be parents, and we have to focus on our own discipleship, that we must love and follow Christ in order to be able to teach that to our kids. And if that's not what we're mirroring in our home, it won't much matter what we say, right? Like we realize what we do, how we play out in many ways speaks much louder than our words to our kids. Like what they see us do is what they're going to emulate. And I see it in my kids. Most of the time it's in the obnoxious way. It's like I'll see one of them and I'll be like, why are you, that's me. Um, yeah, you're like, I need to apologize to some people. But, I'll just quickly walk through a few areas that I thought of, like on personal assessment, and I'll fully recognize and reveal to you what you already know. And that the areas that I'm talking about are many of the ways that I struggle. And like I miss the opportunity to influence my kids in the house. The first, the biggest, TV and phone use. That one hurts, right? The stats on TV and phone use are kind of like just terrifying, to be honest. But obviously, having teenage kids and older kids, like the desire for a phone and that connectedness and the decisions that we have down the road about are we going to give a phone or when, what control, that's just going to start with us, right? Let this one creep you out a little bit. Average phone use in the U.S., by an adult 5.4 hours a day. 58 times a day. Oh, that's the average, right? So 58 times a day on average, pick up the phone to look at it. Could you even think about that? And I can't even count. And again, it's embarrassing to think about like how many times a day I pick up my phone and I don't even know, and I look at it and I don't even know why I'm looking at it or like what I picked it up to do. And they've even coined a phrase of like zombie scrolling. Like it's yeah, academic journal classification of scrolling for no reason, not even knowing what you're doing. And if you read some of the early child development studies, it's scary to see like they can clearly see speech delays, especially in younger kids, and communication delays, parents with heavy phone use, or parents with heavy screen, or kids with heavy screen time, that they're not communicating as enough because they don't see that, they don't get that from screens, they get it from parents and speaking and eye contact. Which is, man, that's convictional for us. And as we talk about, we're already slammed and we're already busy, and then we're cramming in 5 hours of phone time in a day. Like, that's missed opportunity. If you count that up, that's 81 24-hour days in a year. And we can talk about those practical pieces as well to come back to that. I think that's good. Like Heather's really good about like convictional for me. Like we've done no TV summers. Like all right, for the summer there's no screens, no TV, and there was one kid that struggled with it the most, and that was me. And that was convictional in its piece. But like, I mean, that's a huge one for us just to think about 5 hours a day. It still blows my mind. And that's missed opportunity. That's miscommunication and discipleship and explaining. Awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear it. So, anyway, there's things out there for us to think. But again, the point of that is like in this section is think about yourself first. Like, yeah, if I'm like, kids, you can't watch TV. Not that this has ever happened. But like, I'm watching TV. No, you guys can't watch anything. But like, it's going to start with you. It's going to start with your phone time. When you have phone conversations, your kids can't tell whether you're reading your Bible on your phone or scrolling Facebook. Like that, there's no difference to them. They don't see it. They're going to want a phone earlier and more often if you're always on yours. Who knows what? And this is one that I had to change. Like I was reading my devotion on my phone, and I realized like my kids never see me read the Bible because I was reading it on my phone and they didn't realize it, or I read before they woke up. So thinking about like, okay, if you want a child that's a disciple of Christ, like are they seeing that in you? Or do they see you read your Bible on your own? Do they see you have a devotion time? Do they see that as a priority? Um, I think the other piece is just to evaluate us personally, to think about like our busyness. Who is in charge of how busy your family is? Like you are. And yeah, there are stages in life where you have minimal influence over that, but the reality is you choose. You choose how busy you are. And when we talk about parenting and already being slammed with a lot of little voices that's asking us a bazillion different questions at a time, if we don't make time to be parents and make time to communicate and have those little discussions, and I'm sure you all with older kids now can vouch for it. Like if you don't start then, by the time they're teenagers, they're no longer expecting it, and you sure won't get a shot then, if you haven't been working that up and talking and making a habit of that communication. And I think a lot of that comes down, some of that comes down to personality and what your stress level and tolerance is. Like some people can run wide open and it doesn't stress them out and they're still calm, and other people are a mess. And you think about it, are you parenting effectively if every time you're getting ready to go somewhere you're just screaming at a bunch of kids to get in the car and get ready? It's probably not communicating what you wanted to communicate. And obviously it's going to happen sometimes, right? That is going to happen, and they are going to have to learn like, yeah, it's time to go, you do have to get in the car and go. But for the acknowledgement of, if we make that the trend of our life, of their childhood, that in and of itself we made busyness an idol. and that we've missed out and set ourselves and our kids up for issue, right? Like when you set the schedule that swamped, like you're setting yourself up to not be effective, and you're setting your kids up to be worn out, tired, and exhausted. And I think that there's multiple ways with that. Obviously, I'm harping on the busyness more. You probably realize that's more my struggle. But some people struggle differently. And you got, your kids are built-in excuses. Maybe you use them to say like, no, I'm not going to anything because so-and-so's got nap time now. Or, and you're using them as the ultimate excuse to get out of anything. But I think it's just important to be intentional, to think about your busyness level. Is it too high? Is it too low? Do you need to throttle back? I'll share for our family, we needed to throttle back for a while. COVID happened at such a time, it helped us throttle back and think about our schedule more intentionally. And as we're coming back into real life, I think that we're much more cognizant of how slammed we allow ourselves to be, how much sports and activities we allow, in saying, okay, our main objective is building disciples of Christ. I know your genetics, you will never be in the NBA. Like, if that's our purpose, what's our day-to-day look like? And we're running up on time quick, but kind of to end with, I just encourage you, as you think about being an intentional parent, take time for personal assessment. And that's hard. That is hard, and it takes prayerful intentionality. And even as I say that, we've got parents of all stages in this class, and no matter where you are, I think the value in this is just taking time for us to think about our parenting. Think about what we're doing. Think about our trajectory, where we want to be. Are we on target? And where are the adjustments, where are the conversations, what are our own reflection, what are our own areas we need to work on? What are the ones we need to communicate with our spouses on about where we want to be and how to get there? And it's hard to do for yourself, but we do it for other people so easily, right? Like, we're experts at that. We can critique our spouse super easy on their parenting. And we can look at others and say, well, they're doing it wrong. But it's hard to do for ourselves, but it matters. And I would encourage you to take that advice and that input from others whenever you can, just knowing that when you do hear it, your first instinct will always be defensiveness and upset. And obviously some sources you don't need to take parenting advice from, but there's a lot more often, I would guess, that we do get input from Sunday school teachers or from teachers at school or from others that we need to take heed and listen to and really reflect on, of if that's something that we do need to consider in our parenting and where we go. And in that, I think the struggle for us is just the desire to appear perfect on the outside. And you're like, all right, we all know life is not an Instagram feed. Like, we all realize that, but still we feel the need to uphold it. Like, and it's in all of us a little bit. But to be our most effective Christ followers and to build Christ followers, we have to let go of some of that, especially within our church body, and be able to take and receive input from others and listen earnestly. So, my request at the end of this week, just wherever you are in your parenting journey, think about where you want to be. Think about where your kids are on that trajectory of where you hope to see them be. And prayerfully assess and reflect on your own parenting. And I joked about spouses and us correcting, but that happens at our house a lot. Like, we've kind of made it a habit of very humbly being able to talk to one another. And I know that, Heather has to talk to me a lot. Like, okay, like, you have gone from teaching to now you're just parenting by yelling. You need to chill it out. Like, you're missing the heart in this. You're just correcting behavior. And it has to go both ways. But you have to invite and have those conversations, and not doing it in front of your kids. And the last part of that, I think some of the best teaching that we can do is teaching when we know we're in a broken world. We know we're broken. So how often do you just say to your kids, like, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I need to ask your forgiveness. So modeling for them what failure and what sin should look like for a follower of Christ, of saying, like, I'm not perfect, I messed up on this, I'm sorry, I need to ask you to forgive me, but more importantly, I need to ask God to forgive me. And those moments can often be the most powerful and the best teaching moments. Well, with that, thanks for joining in this morning. I told you a little bit about where we're going. We're going to hit on our focus next week and to talk about the authority piece. Very countercultural right now. Having biblical authority, having authority in the home is not something that a lot of people will like to hear about. And then finally, the communication and then focusing on heart and building character. At the end of the day, like we talked about, like our kids in many ways are mirrors. They're looking for us and they're reflecting it. And for us, we can take the load off and we point those mirrors to Christ, the one perfect example in knowing that we're not.